I finally just finished popping the last cipher machine. I must say I'm starting to feel a little bit bad for the hunter though, because we did stun him a million times with the prospector, and then we used forward as well, and we did cipher rush him and finish the match within 3 minutes. Nah, I'm sure he'll be fine though. Guys, this isn't fair anymore. You literally finished the match in 3 minutes. I managed to get one survivor chaired, and even when I got him chaired, you rescued with tie turner, and there was nothing that I could do. This game just isn't fair anymore. Okay then, we'll give you a little bit more of a chance. We'll just decode the door a little slower than usual. DoomShock was removed in Season 6. A lot of players have fond memories of it, and a lot of people also want to bring it back again. But what was DoomShock? Well, DoomShock was a persona trait used for hunters, technically called Fallen Misfortune. It eventually got replaced by Wither on the hunter persona web. You could invest 3 stacks of points into it to increase its effects. Its effects? Well, after chairing a survivor and moving away from the chair from a certain distance, you would get a small chance of receiving a detention style effect. First of all, your eyes would start glowing a yellow color, similar to detention, but in a different color. And then you would deal double damage to whoever you hit, as long as you were lucky enough. Specifically, if you moved 18 meters away from a chaired survivor, you would receive a 10% chance, a 15% chance, or a 20% chance, depending on how many points you invested into it, of dealing double fear when you hit a survivor. Some would say that having a detention style effect after leaving a chair would be quite powerful, even if it is a low chance of you being able to get this ability, but Netease presumably added it to the game to be able to motivate hunters to not camp chairs. But eventually they removed it due to it being very luck based. Some say that bringing back this effect would make the game more interesting again. Hunters would have less reasons to camp, and survivors would have more reasons to be more careful when they're coming in to rescue, and they'll be more careful strategizing. This may be true, but I think there might be another reason for this big desire to bring this whole DoomShock back again. It is the fact that the persona webs for both hunters and for survivors are boring. Yes, boring. When was the last time that you got excited about testing out or trying a new persona web on a new hunter or on a new survivor, editing something to your own liking so that you can maybe customize your own gameplay? Probably not often, I'd assume. Most survivors take the same type of persona web, varying a little bit between the roles like decoder, rescuer, kiter, and so on. Borrowed time is a necessity. Tie turner is also a necessity, and if you don't bring tie turner because the rest of your team takes it, then you take broken windows. Spectator is usually not used at all. Oh, and of course you've got to take a long exit path as well. The same kind of thing happens for hunters as well, but in a slightly different way. Each hunter will have 1 to 2 variants on their persona web, usually one being the one that everybody uses and the second one being a less viable option. Not using that set persona web for the hunter usually means you're going to lose the match, or you're going to be at a serious disadvantage. Some hunters need insolence, some hunters need detention, and some hunters need trump card just to be able to manage the match over as a whole. I think the main reason right now why the persona web is so stagnant is due to the fact that Netease just doesn't and refuses to adjust it. The last adjustment that we had to the persona web would have been when they introduced the tarot game mode, and that technically wasn't adjusting the persona web, but adding an extra layer to it that was only for that one specific game mode. If we're talking about a proper adjustment to it, it happened over 6 months ago when they introduced Undead, and I really don't want to get into those adjustments right now. Netease is very quick to adjust hunters and survivors, their abilities, giving them new abilities, reducing or increasing their numbers, all with the attempt to try and balance the game as a whole. But you could argue that changing the persona webs would actually be able to help put survivors and hunters into a more equal place overall, maybe bumping up the hunters' abilities overall in matches, or changing the pace of all matches as a whole. Why are there some web traits that both survivors and hunters have to take with them? Tinnitus, borrowed time, exit path, detention. Couldn't all of these traits be removed completely and actually added into the game itself so that all hunters and all survivors get these abilities automatically when the certain conditions are met? For example, every survivor could get healed 0.5% of their health as soon as the last cipher machine is popped, or the hunter will get detention as soon as the last cipher machine is popped. Having inbuilt tinnitus into every single hunter means that you'll be able to know when there's a survivor near you. This is something that is necessary for a hunter to be able to have. These abilities overall just feel like they should naturally already be there. And having these become inbuilt abilities would mean that the persona web would feel less like something that you barely touch and something that's a little bit more interactive that you might edit to your own style. Removing the aforementioned traits would mean that you would also have more space, or Netease would have more space to be able to add new and creative persona web traits. There are also some persona traits that are completely useless and have no real use for them except for helping beginner players to learn the game. Mech Elite, Obsession, and Cold are prime examples of this. All three of these are heavily beginner focused. They only help people who don't know where the boxes are, or they don't know where the hunter is. You could argue that some of these do have some kind of uses, but again, they feel kind of pointless. They don't serve any purpose for the match. What I suggest that they could do with these abilities instead is give them to the beginner players. If you're below a certain rank, maybe below Hound, you can have these abilities built into your game itself. So as soon as you get above the worker bee, these abilities will be turned off because you're now not considered to be a beginner anymore. Once again, removing these abilities will give Netease more space to be able to create some more exciting persona traits and maybe be a bit more creative. A good example of an interesting persona trait is Restraint. This reduces your fear radius by 15%. It is a fun one, but also a little bit underpowered. But it can completely change how a match plays out, because now the survivors don't know how close you are until you're right upon them. It doesn't make the survivors feel completely powerless against the hunter because it only reduces it by a small amount, but can still take them off guard. So it doesn't mean that they're helpless, but they also are at a slight disadvantage. And it also isn't something that a hunter feels like they need to take every match. It's something that's more fun and a bit more niche. You could argue that this trait is heavily countered by voice chat, and it really is, and I do think that even this trait could be improved upon, but this concept of a persona trait is exactly what Netease should be adding more of into the game, and removing some of the ones that are a little bit more overpowered. I also want to make the argument that Survivor's persona webs feel much more impactful to the match overall than a hunter's persona web. Movement speeds being increased by 30, 40, or even 50% after vaulting a pallet when you're using knee-jerk reflex is in huge contrast to the reducing of healing, decoding, and also destroying speeds of survivors that hunters can slow down by 3 to 5 or even 7% maximum when a survivor is in the terror radius. These numbers are completely different. We've gone from tens of percents to less than 10% maximum with full points. In most cases, this persona trait is not taken unless people are going for insolence, so it is useless overall because it reduces it to such a small extent and only in a small area. Another example is Survivor's Instinct that increases decoding by 5, 15 or even 30% depending on how many survivors have been eliminated, compared to 3% decoding, healing and also destroying debuff per survivor that is damaged in a match. That really feels less impactful because once again, it can get to 12%, but most hunters can't deal much damage and spend most of the match without even seeing most of the survivors. By the time that the hunter has even got a couple of hits on most survivors, the match may already be near its end, possibly in the end game now when people are trying to escape and there aren't any cipher machines to decode anymore. Claustrophobia and self-deception also feel completely useless and pointless. Claustrophobia, for example, has such a niche activation clause that it means that it's really useless for most of the match, and you just have to almost hope that you're going to lose the match to be able to get this effect. I think that there are multiple things that Netease needs to mess around with in the persona web, and they need to adjust and kind of increase and decrease some of the numbers on. What I do think that Netease needs to do is they need to prioritize into making the persona web into less of something that you need to take per a match and more something that you can customize to make your gameplay a little bit more interesting and a little bit more surprising as well. And I really do think that this was the original goal of having the persona web. It's to be able to customize your gameplay to make your style stand out from somebody else playing the same character. Bringing the game to a balanced game state is really what I want Netease to do. And to do so, I really think that they need to bring the game down to Wu Chang's level. Watch this video if you want to understand why.